So we've been talking about the sharing economy, and within any economy there has to be a marketplace. App stores and app store strategies just continue to rise in prominence and importance, regardless of whether you're a startup, a large corporation, a brand, or anyone who wishes to distribute content to a digital device. We're really lucky today to be joined by a number of experts in the field who are going to talk a little bit about some of the things they're seeing as app stores continue to emerge and continue to mature. It's a panel, and to welcome them on stage, please would you welcome the moderator for the panel, Robin Wauters, the European editor of the LeWeb, and the rest of the panel members. Please welcome them on stage.
Thank you, Ben. So hello, good afternoon, everyone. We do have a panel of experts. I'm not one of them. My name is Robin Wauters. I'm a European editor of the LeWeb. And we're going to talk about, I think the title used to be Cracking the App Store, and we changed it to Ruling the App Store. And it's basically, we're going to talk about how you can, how cross-platform app development and distribution can help you increase engagement, monetize your applications and your services, and how the web and mobile relate to each other these days, etc. So we have an excellent panel today. On my left is Keustermans. He lives in London. I think I'm the only one who's pronouncing his name right in this room, because he's a fellow Belgian, that's why. Raf is an entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of a social casino games company called Plumbee, based here in London. We have Julien Codorniou, who is the head of EMEA platform partnerships. Is that correct, for Facebook? So we've been on a couple of panels together on Facebook gaming, etc. So, and we have Erik Lammerding, who founded a new company called Network, which he can't talk about because it's going to launch tomorrow. He doesn't have anything to say about it. But the reason that he's on this panel is because he spent the last 12 years at Apple, where he was in product marketing, handling developer relationships, mostly for consumer apps. So he knows a lot about what goes on in Apple App Store, etc. So we're going to start with Raf. I briefly introduced you, but can you tell us a little bit more about Plumbee?
Sure. Plumbee, as you said, we make social casino games on mobile and on Facebook. Free-to-play casino games, so they're not gambling. You play with virtual chips, a little bit like Zynga Poker. We have one game right now called Mirrorball Slots. We launched it about a year ago on Facebook. And we got in beta on iOS in Canada in December, and a couple of weeks ago we launched it globally in all countries on iOS. Still a little bit early days, but we spent a lot of time testing, optimizing, learning, so hopefully we can share some of that with you. We also have an investment in a real money gaming company, another startup, because having one startup is very boring. Company called Bonza Gaming, and Bonza, they also have a slots game, Bonza Slots, but it's a real money slot, so it's not a free-to-play game, it's an actual gambling app, and it's actually one of the first apps, real money apps, that is allowed on Facebook in the UK for over 18 players. So that's us.
Right. Julien, can you tell us a little bit more about your role, just to set the context for the rest of the conversation?
Yep, so I'm part of the platform team at Facebook in Europe. We work with developers, mainly gaming developers, building apps and games on the Facebook platform, on Facebook.com, like King.com or Plumbee, out of Facebook, like Deezer or Spotify, and on mobile, like King.com again, Wooga, Deezer, Spotify again, so wide variety of developers across Europe.
Just quickly, how big is the platform team for Facebook in Europe?
I think we must be 20 people.
20 people.
And
24
growing.
actually.
24 actually.
And growing really fast, isn't it?
And growing and hiring, so if you know any good people, send them to us.
Right. Erik, give us some insight in what your expertise is and what your experience at Apple has led you to this panel, for one thing.
Sure. Well, aside from starting something new that you'll hear about shortly, spent quite a bit of time at Apple. I guess Julian's doppelganger at Apple in product marketing, the developer organization. We were really chartered with making sure third parties, mostly on the consumer side, which was what my team focused on, were building the best apps possible. So it was an outbound function and role, and worked closely from go-to-market, get-to-market, the technology side, UI, UX, sort of the whole package to make sure once it hit the App Store, it was the best product possible.
Which is something very essential. We were talking about this backstage. Your team wasn't really responsible in helping developers make a lot of money on the App Store. It was mostly, being quality products to the iOS App Store, making products that are really valuable for users, not just because of the money, but also for fun and the design and the ease of the product, etc. So I think that's something that's very essential to your role.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's a good distinction. We, of course, we're very interested in the financial success of the companies, but that's not what we led with. It was leading with the product quality. There was another team in the App Store that worked on the marketing merchant side and what got promoted and so forth. So we work closely with them.
So our panel is ruling the app stores. App stores that have gotten very, very big lately. Just to illustrate, the iOS App Store currently has about 850,000 apps. I think there are about 700,000 on Google Play Store. Wish we would have had someone from Google here on this panel, but we don't. But 700,000 apps on Google Play. And how many apps on Facebook?
I actually don't know.
Me neither. So my very basic question is, if the topic is going to be ruling the app stores, how do you rule the app stores? Or how do you want to define ruling the app store? Is it becoming the top grossing app? Is it getting high ranking? Is it getting high ratings from users? What's valuable to you as an entrepreneur building apps?
It depends on obviously which category you are, what your business strategy is. App stores are obviously, it's a tricky beast, right? There's lots of pros and cons. I think one of the things you need to be aware of with an app store is that it's a traditional retail environment. Shelf space, visibility is extremely important. It's very hard to be discovered if you're not visible in an app store, which is where it's quite different from, for example, open web, where you have very different dynamics. And also what Erik actually mentioned earlier, the influence of the owners of the shop, the owners of the store is really important, because depending on what they're looking for, what they want to surface, what they want to feature, that's going to decide to a large degree the success of certain apps. And the risk, or the potential risk, is also that everything that's cool in the world of Apple is what's going to get featured. And if you're not part of their cool universe, you probably struggle. For example, Apple is notoriously skeptical, I would say, about casino, both free-to-play casino and also real money gambling. And that's their good right, but that basically means if you're in one of those categories, you don't need to expect Apple to help you, so you have to do it yourselves.
Well, at least you're still in the App Store.
That's true, yeah, that's true. But obviously you need to work harder, I think, if you're in one of those categories that Apple doesn't really love. And there's not a lot of silver bullets, right? It comes down to hard work, good products. If you have an existing audience, for example, on Facebook, that's a huge advantage. You can start. You don't have to start from scratch. You can actually start from a more comfortable position, which is what we are seeing right now. And it also comes down to ad dollars. There's not a lot of ways around it. There's always the one exception of apps that go completely viral, word of mouth. But for most companies, I think it's still good products, hard work.
And an advertising budget.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Erik, do you agree with that statement? Does a company need an ad budget to make it big in the App Store these days?
Well, we had a spirited conversation in the back, and to be clear, I'm not here as an Apple representative, but I had certainly some history in seeing the App Store launch and so forth. And you mentioned free-to-play. I don't think there's an inherent bias against free-to-play. I think of an app like The Simpsons. It's very whimsical. It has lots of pop culture references that people have an affinity for. So it's a great app. It's a free-to-play app. It's been promoted and so forth. I can't comment on casino apps per se, but it really comes down to who are the companies that are building with the platform in mind, building for quality, that are innovating on the platform. And going back to sort of the apps that make money, if people are familiar with the App Store, they know there's 3 categories. There's top grossing, top paid, and top free. And then any day, there's going to be apps in there that Apple has never spoken to that company. They're new. They haven't heard from them. Somehow they've risen in the charts, hopefully legally. That's not always been the case. But so apps find a way as well, independent
good
of
apps
Apple's
too.
promotion.
Good
So,
apps too, I guess.
Yeah. Not always good apps.
Not always good apps.
Yeah.
Good point. So we know that Facebook is obviously a platform worth leveraging for a lot of companies and app developers. But how does Facebook actively help developers, up their rating, up their rankings in the App Store? How do you help them?
Talking about mobile app stores?
No, I'm talking about Facebook App
The
Centers.
Facebook App Store. So we have a platform team and we have a developer website. I mean, the platform is supposed to be self-service, so anybody can come, learn how it works, develop an app, put it on Facebook, and reach millions of users. I would say for the high potential startups or for the big companies willing to become social, we have dedicated teams in Europe, in Asia, and in the US. So we try to identify and engage as soon as possible these companies, and we provide support. And what defines us as a platform company is that we try to drive adoption, satisfaction, and revenues. And these three criteria are equally important among the developers ecosystem. But we have dedicated team, and we always look forward to meeting new companies. We talked about pretty simple games earlier. That's one French company in Paris that grew from 0 to 9 million DAUs in 6 months without, I would say, a significant marketing budget, just because they have a nice game and they do a very smart use of the Facebook platform on Facebook. And what will happen when they will launch on mobile is that that legacy and that audience that they build on Facebook will be happy to discover that app on the Facebook mobile app in the newsfeed, and they will naturally install the application and play. So we believe we have a great cross-platform to drive installations, engagement, re-engagement, and monetization on Facebook, iOS, Android.
Yeah. Also, I would say as a developer, Facebook is crucial almost. Like especially if you're in the world of games, the deep integration, specifically on iOS and also more and more on Android, is invaluable to get distribution. For example, like our game, we're now cross-platform. You can play our game on Facebook and on iOS. People will see, like if a friend sends you a gift or sends you a message, you'll actually see it on your iPhone. You actually get a message. So it's free distribution. Like it's basically like it's so important, specifically if you have an existing audience. We have 1.3 million users on Facebook. All those people who have an iPhone will actually start seeing messages from their friends, messages from the game. And also from an advertising point of view, the fact is that Facebook obviously has a lot of data, as we all know, but also allows you to use the data to target very well the users that you believe will be valuable and relevant for your game, which is still a big problem in mobile advertising in general, targeting, making sure that the right people get the right message. And that's also, I think, where Facebook is definitely valuable.
So, Julien, you indicated to me before this panel that 80% of the top grossing iOS and Android apps leverage Facebook.
Yeah.
That seems like a high percentage, but I'm thinking, what's the deal with the other 20%?
I don't know. Maybe they don't want to make social apps, or they don't see the point, but there's clearly a pattern happening right now in the world.
But it also means that you can get into the top grossing rankings without using Facebook. It's possible.
I think
it's like 20%.
I think it helps, but there's clearly a pattern happening right now, at least in the world of gaming, which is that if you want to be big on mobile, you have to be big on Facebook first. This is exactly what happened to Candy Crush Saga, which is the biggest game in the world.
Do you agree with it, Erik?
Yeah.
I missed it.
To be big on iOS and Android, you have to be big on mobile, on Facebook first.
In gaming.
Games.
There's certainly a strong connection, but I don't believe it's a requirement. No, I mean, again, if you go back to the charts, there are a number of top grossing apps that aren't dependent on it, but it certainly stands to reason that the ability to connect with a known community is going to benefit the overall gaming or other app experience. So a strong correlation.
Sure. All right, let's talk about app discovery, because obviously when you have this many apps in the app stores, it gets harder for users to find apps that are relevant to them. It gets a little harder for app developers to target because the scope gets wider. So how do you deal with that from a developer standpoint? Raf?
So it's interesting. I can tell you what doesn't work anymore.
It's a good one. What doesn't work?
I think,
or better, what used to work that doesn't work
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a lot of companies the last couple of years used a lot of tricks, dirty tricks, to get their rankings up, using incentivized downloads, incentivized installs. There were a couple of companies specialized in that, and I think Apple and also Google, rightly so, pushed back against those companies, because what they actually did is they somehow offered developers a way to get enormous amounts of downloads and installs that didn't actually have a lot of value. There were some of them even used like bot networks, etc. With the idea that they basically, you buy visibility, you don't buy users directly, and you do buy, but they're not really relevant for your game. But you buy a position in the top 10 free ranking, and from there you obviously have a much higher chance that people will find you. Like, you're not one of the 800,000, you're actually in the top 10. A lot of people actually use the App Store to discover new games. The problem is that everybody started doing that, and if everybody starts doing it, it obviously loses the impact. You basically still pay to get in the top 10, but the next day another guy will take your position. Right. So you have a very, very short window of opportunity to actually benefit from the organic viral growth that it brings you. And obviously also from a consumer point of view, it's not very nice. It's not, those apps probably don't have the right almost to be there. So those things I think don't really work anymore. People are still chasing rankings, using those tricks, using incentivized installs, etc. I think you see it less and less. People actually move back to more real, proper marketing, like what is my target audience, how can I reach them, what is the message that I will bring out to convince them to try my product. And that's, I think, a good thing.
So that's what doesn't work anymore. What are some of the things that do work? Best practices. Can you share some?
Erik, you want to start?
That's out of my purview. I focused on product quality, the app itself. So we really didn't delve a whole lot into the discoverability side of things. But just to comment on one of the things that you said, that there was a big concern about Apple when they won't be named, but certain players made money allowing apps to be rise in the rankings artificially. That was not a good thing. And think of it through Apple's principal filter, which is consumer experience. The rankings exist for users. They're not principally designed for the developers. It's for the users to be one tool to discover apps. So as that got polluted, it was a real concern. They're very protective, as they should be, of that. Anyway, sorry to punt on the other side, but I can't claim expertise on it.
As far as Facebook is concerned, I think in the US, Facebook represents 23% of the time spent on mobile. So the Facebook mobile newsfeed is a very natural place to discover interesting apps. So in order to show up in the newsfeed, you can integrate with the Facebook platform and leverage the bookmarks, the request, notifications, all of that. Or you can simply advertise on Facebook. And you know, mobile advertising represented 0% of Facebook advertising revenues 8 months ago. In the last quarter, it was 30%. So a lot of companies in gaming and non-gaming space, like Deezer, Spotify, Y-Plan, Get Taxi, use that mobile app install ad format that we just launched. And you can target, let's say you're Get Taxi, you're launching in New York. You can say, I want to reach people in New York using Facebook, of course, above 35, using an Android tablet and connected over Wi-Fi. That's the kind of targeting you can do. And this is how you can reach high quality and highly engaged users, thanks to their graph.
Yeah. A couple of other small points that I think most people probably know about it is, like, specifically on the iPhone, make sure your app is below 50 megabytes. The Apple actually gives you a warning if you're downloading an app, specifically if you're on 3G, to make sure that people don't end up with very large data fees. So the moment your app is above 50 megabytes, it's very, very hard actually to get, like, your click-through ratios will drop, etc. So you really should try to get any app below 50 megabytes. So there's a couple of those kind of things that are really, really important, because they can actually really hurt if you want to start spending money on advertising. Those are some of the basics. Also tracking, analytics. I don't think I'm saying anything really new here, but it is so crucial to manage exactly, to understand how much money you can afford to spend on the user.
So as a startup, per definition, you have limited resources. How do you decide which platform to go on first, and how do you decide which one to go on next? what drives the decisions?
There's a lot of different things we take into consideration. Obviously, we had an existing game on Facebook. Also looking at our audience tend to skew a bit older. We looked at our existing audience. We found that iOS was a more dominant platform than Android, so that's one reason. Also, we know that iOS monetizes better than Android in general, specifically for games. Google is closing the gap, but there's still quite a bit. Typically, Android monetizes 3 times less than iOS, so on a per-user level. So that's obviously also definitely something you want to take into consideration.
These are your metrics, not in general.
Yeah, no, this is actually general. I think if you think, there was a report a while ago that actually said that in general, we're not Android yet, so I don't have any comparison, but in general, Android monetizes 3 times less.
Interesting.
It used to be 8 times less, right? So like Google is closing the gap, Android is closing the gap, but there's still 3 times is a lot, specifically for a startup. 3 times more revenue is something you want to take into consideration for sure.
Right. So talking about platforms, obviously being dependent of platforms like Facebook and iOS gives you a lot of advantages in terms of discoverability, distribution, audience that you can tap. On the other hand, you're dependent of this platform. And then we can have all the discussion like, should you build a service for the mobile website or mobile web apps? Is it worth the developer's time to do that still, or to do it in addition to native apps? Yes or no? And I want to hear from the platform guys. So Julien, you can start.
So being a mono-platform company can be very risky, and we've seen some bad examples recently. But once again, what we see right now is that you have to be cross-platform. Web, and if web, Facebook, if you're a gaming company, and you have to be on iOS and on Android. So the days of the mono-platform companies are over. I mean, nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants to be cross-platform. It was to be Facebook or iOS first, but now it's everywhere. Facebook, iOS, Android. So it's becoming less and less risky for entrepreneurs or developers having that cross-platform strategy. And once again, we believe that Facebook is the cross-platform platform that can drive distribution across the board. No matter where your users are, no matter what type of apps you do, you can get distribution everywhere. Just a company like Deezer, for example, which I know very well, thanks to Facebook platform, so for free, we send them every week 400,000 new members. People who discover Deezer on Facebook, on the web, on mobile with the Open Graph, click on the link, become a member. So you can get a lot of distribution, but you have to make sure that after the click, there is something, no matter where your users are, Facebook, iOS, web, or Android.
Erik?
Well, it's something I feel pretty passionately about, platform, that is, and building for the platform, and definitely speaking with my Apple hat off. I think this applies whether you're Apple, whether you're Google, whether you're Microsoft, et cetera, that build with the platform in mind. The reason why I say that is I saw a number of companies, mostly from economic pressure, saying, well, we're gonna take the lowest common denominator approach, kind of peanut butter, spread it out, which ultimately meant an inferior consumer experience in deference to sort of bowing at the altar of being all things to all people or on all platforms. And as these platform vendors innovate and bring new features that ultimately, at least in principle, should benefit the consumer, you sort of paint yourself in a corner to then not be able to take advantage of them. Apple, I know, is holding their Worldwide Developers Conference next week. I have no idea what they are or are not going to announce, but if history holds, they announce a lot of new developer tools and APIs. So a company that is sort of beholden to, well, we're going to be the same everywhere, and if Apple or somebody else announces something very interesting, you may not be able to take advantage of it. It's more work, it's more cost up front, but ultimately over time, it's the best investment.
Right. At the same time, we've seen Apple quite recently actually clamping down on applications that help you share recommendations with your friends. Certain app search tools, you've seen what happened to App Gratis, for example. So obviously you don't have to comment on this from an Apple standpoint because you don't work there anymore.
You're right.
But overall, do you think it's risky for companies like that actually make it easier for users to discover new apps?
Well, I mean, the higher level question is discoverability and the path to get there. And clearly Apple and others want to make discovery a better experience. So I can't comment on what is or isn't taken down or what will be, but discovery is certainly an area that could improve a lot, and so we'll have to see what they do, but I can't comment on the apps that have been brought down.
As a developer, I would say that Apple is a little bit more a scary company than Facebook. Like, it's very hard, for example, to talk with someone. It's not that you have an account manager or a partner manager you can just ring up and have a conversation with.
If you see them at conferences, it usually means they left.
That's actually true. But like for Facebook, for example, it's much easier to talk with Facebook. It's also easier to understand how we are aligned with Facebook from a revenue point of view. Obviously, there's the percentage that Facebook's take from the payments, also like advertising. It's a little bit easier to see how it's also in Facebook's interest to help us. While with Apple, as Erik was saying in the beginning, like his team, obviously they looked at revenue as well, but in a lot of cases, Apple will feature apps that highlight the hardware, like the screen, the Retina screen, and so on, not necessarily the highest grossing or the best monetizing apps. So it's much harder, I think, as a developer to understand what Apple actually wants and what are they actually trying to achieve, and am I now one of the cool companies or not, and is it going to change tomorrow? I think, it is what it is, right? But it is harder, I think, for a developer to understand what Apple actually is all about and what they're looking for.
I have maybe a contrarian view on that. I think it's actually pretty easy. It's kind of follow their lead. Next week there'll be some suite of announcements. I'm speculating. I don't know what they'll be. The people that take advantage of those. I'll give a concrete example. Last year, iOS 6 shipped. There was a new feature called Passbook. I don't know if people have seen that. You can have, events, airline tickets, and so forth there. Well, the people that took advantage of that quickly, they were featured, got a lot of love, and so forth. It's not 100%, but you look at the direction they're going with the features that have an impact on the consumer. There's a good likelihood of connection with, is Apple going to be interested in what you're building? Right. So build a great app, build with the hardware and platform in mind, you get Apple's attention. That may not be your business model, though. So, there are apps that make a lot of money that never get attention from Apple.
Right. So going back to discoverability, obviously on the Facebook platform, a lot of it depends on the dynamics of the users, because it's usually people sharing games and inviting people to play, etc. But how does Facebook help this discoverability for new app developers specifically?
So with the platform, with the Open Graph, or with advertising with mobile app install ads, but we make sure that social is a very important part of the applications developed by the people we work with. Pinterest is a very good example, or Airbnb. From the Airbnb application, you can publish on Facebook very interesting stories. Same thing with Pinterest or Wipolo or Cinemur, companies we talked about. So we want to see if there is a good social experience, and that goes with a good platform integration. So we make sure the platform integration is at the best possible levels. Right. And if you publish interesting stories on Facebook, you'll get distribution. Stories that people like or comment.
In a way, almost like to a degree at least, Facebook becomes an alternative entry point to the App Store, maybe even an alternative App Store at some point, which will be interesting to see how the other operators will actually handle that, like Apple's and Google's. Like if Facebook takes a very dominant position, that would be good for us as a game developer and for some of our colleagues and competitors, but it will be interesting to see how that's going to work out at the company level.
I agree. So when you talk about mobile app stores, it's usually synonymous with App Store and Google Play, Amazon. But there's a plethora of app stores that are built by carriers or alternative Android application stores. And then you have this company, Yandex, for example, building alternatives, not just stores, but also UIs for Android, etc. So as a developer, do you pay attention to this whole alternative app store?
It's part of the long tail. Like it's the same as if, for example, are you going to go into Russia with VK Contact? Like those guys are still around, and there's still a lot of other local social networks. It's part of the long tail. It's if you have some time over, if the company is mature and you're profitable, you can probably hire a couple of engineers to focus on those opportunities. They're probably smaller. They're not comparable, I think, with Apple, Facebook, or Android. But if you combine 5 or 6 of those small opportunities, they might still add up to something meaningful.
I was just going to say, because maybe that's relevant for some startups out there that are building apps. There are tools now that can get you in like 130 alternative app stores in one go. Well, they're getting there, but at some point it's going to be possible, and then it might make sense. Because there are a lot of people using it.
I think the challenge is, one is to get in the App Store, and that's not easy, but that's not the most difficult part. It's more the maintenance. You need to keep managing it. You need to understand what's happening where and why, and what do I need to change or improve. And that's where it becomes a little bit harder.
And then you have to worry about rankings and rates.
Exactly, exactly. And invoicing and customer support, etc., etc., etc. So, and they all have their own API. So if you want to send a gift in a game, it's not that easy that you can just have some sort of like universal API that works the same way everywhere. So it's not that easy to do it, but.
Erik, give us a little glimpse of what you're going to be working on. Not where you're going to.
You are a good journalist.
Well,
I can't give you a glimpse. The company's called Network. I can say that part of the inspiration was Apple, and seeing amazing products, amazing experiences, and me and a few other people felt that there can be even better experiences on touch devices. And that's all I can say. So we're building something from the ground up with some great people, and stay tuned. You'll hear more in the next day-ish, but very excited.
All right, perfect. Well, we're running out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.